When I was a kid growing up in Cedar Falls, Iowa, the phrase I heard more than any other wasn't, "I love you," or "I'm proud of you." It was, "You owe us everything, Daniel. Don't you forget it." That line came from my father, Robert Bob Whitaker, a man whose voice carried like a shotgun blast through the thin walls of our weather-beaten ranch-style house. My mother, Elaine, rarely said the words herself, but she nodded along every time, her silence an iron seal of approval. To them, my very existence was a transaction, a ledger where they tallied diapers, meals, school supplies, and guilt. Our house sat at the edge of a soybean field, the kind of place where the nights were quiet but never peaceful. Inside, the air was thick with criticism, correction, and the steady hum of resentment. I remember the tan carpet stained with coffee and grease, the brown plaid couch that smelled faintly of cigarettes, and the ever-present drone of the evening news that served as background music to my father's lectures. Bob worked at the grain mill, came home coated in dust, and made sure everyone in the family knew how hard he had it. He liked to slam his boots down in the entryway and bark, "If it weren't for me, you kids wouldn't eat." Remember that. Elaine worked part-time at the library, and though she had a softer voice, her sharpness cut just as deep. "Don't waste our money on foolish dreams," she'd say whenever I mentioned wanting to play baseball, join the band, or, God forbid, apply for art classes. I learned quickly that wanting things was dangerous. If I asked for something, I was greedy. If I succeeded at something, I was arrogant. If I failed, I was a disgrace. No matter what, the refrain was the same. You owe us everything. At school, I became a ghost. I kept my head down, did my work, and tried not to attract attention. Teachers sometimes praised my essays or my knack for math, but I brushed off the compliments. At home, praise was ammunition, proof that I thought too highly of myself. I hid my report cards in my backpack and shrugged whenever my parents asked. Better to appear average than risk being accused of ambition. Still, even ghosts dream. Late at night, lying on my creaky twin bed beneath peeling wallpaper, I'd imagine a life beyond Cedar Falls. I pictured myself in a city, working a job that mattered, living in an apartment with tall windows, eating dinners I paid for with my own money. Freedom wasn't just about geography, it was about silence. Silence from their voices, silence from the debt I supposedly owed. But escape felt impossible. Every time I mentioned the future, my father shut me down. "College," he sneered once. "You think you're better than us? Who do you think pays the bills now, huh? You can't even mow the lawn straight, and you want to sit in some fancy classroom?" Elaine added softly, almost tenderly, "Be realistic, Daniel. You're not special. You should stay here. Help your father. Settle down." The truth was, they didn't want me to leave. My obedience was their currency. My dependence kept their power intact. And deep down, I feared they were right. Maybe I wasn't special. Maybe I'd never escape. The breaking point came in sophomore year of high school. I'd won first place in a statewide essay competition, a piece I'd written about the meaning of freedom, inspired by the farmers I saw working from dawn to dusk in the fields. My English teacher, Mrs. Jameson, submitted it without telling me. When the certificate arrived in the mail, I was stunned. For the first time, I felt a spark of pride, a whisper that maybe I had a voice worth hearing. I made the mistake of showing my parents. Bob read the certificate once, then tossed it on the kitchen table like a useless receipt. "Does this pay the bills?" he asked. "Does this get you a job?" "No. Waste of time." Elaine's comment cut even deeper. "Don't let this go to your head, Daniel. Pride comes before a fall." That night, lying in bed with the certificate crumpled in the trash can, I made a silent vow. If they saw me only as a debtor, then one day I'd prove them wrong. I didn't know how or when, but I swore I'd build a life that was mine, not theirs. Years passed in that same suffocating rhythm. Chores, criticism, and constant reminders that my very existence was an account balance I could never settle. Yet I clung to small rebellions, late nights in the library, where I devoured books on economics, computer science, and history. I saved the allowance I earned from mowing lawns for neighbors, hiding crumpled bills in a shoebox beneath my bed. I whispered dreams to myself that no one else would hear. By the time senior year rolled around, I'd quietly applied to colleges, each application filled out in the dead of night at the school library. When the acceptance letter from the University of Minnesota arrived, complete with a scholarship offer, I hid it under my mattress for a week before daring to tell my parents. Their reaction was exactly what I expected. Bob laughed in my face. Scholarship or not, you think you're leaving this house? Not until you pay us back for 18 years of food and clothes. You think life is free, boy? You owe us. Elaine, as always, was gentler but no less firm. Daniel, you're making a mistake. Out there, nobody will take care of you like we have. You'll fail. And when you do, you'll come crawling back. But this time, something inside me refused to yield. Maybe it was the scholarship letter in my pocket. Maybe it was the years of swallowed pride. Maybe it was the quiet voice of Mrs. Jameson telling me my words had value. Whatever it was, I looked my parents in the eye and said the most dangerous thing I'd ever said. No, I don't owe you anything. For a moment, silence filled the room, the kind of silence I'd dreamed of for years. Then Bob's face turned red, his fists clenched, and I braced for the storm. But inside, I felt strangely calm. Because I knew the truth. My life was about to begin, and theirs was about to lose its grip on me. The August morning I left Cedar Falls was heavy with heat and silence. My parents stood on the porch as I packed the last of my things into a used Ford Taurus I'd bought with 2 summers' worth of mowing lawns and stocking shelves. My father's arms were crossed, his jaw clenched tight. My mother's eyes were dry, but her lips pressed into the thin, resigned line I knew so well. Neither of them hugged me. Neither wished me luck. Bob's final words were the kind you can't forget, no matter how hard you try. You'll come crawling back. Don't think for a second that scholarship makes you free. You owe us, Daniel. Always. I drove away with those words rattling around in my head, but for the first time, I didn't believe them. The highway stretched out like a lifeline, every mile marker pulling me further from the prison of that house. I breathed deeper with each passing town, the air somehow lighter, even though my chest was tight with nerves. College was everything I had hoped and feared it would be. The University of Minnesota's campus felt like another world, brick buildings towering like castles, students spilling across green quads, professors who spoke about ideas as if they mattered. For the first time, I could choose my own schedule, my own meals, my own company. Nobody was watching me with disapproval from across the dinner table. Nobody was reminding me that my existence was a debt. But freedom came with a price. I had no safety net. While other students went home on weekends to stock refrigerators and laundry machines, I worked double shifts at a diner, scraping plates and pouring coffee until my hands smelled permanently of grease. I studied in the library until it closed, then crashed on my dorm bed with textbooks still open. My body ached. My grades slipped dangerously close to failing more than once, but I refused to quit. Every time exhaustion whispered that I couldn't keep going, I heard my father's voice mocking me. You'll fail. You'll come crawling back. That voice became fuel. By senior year, the grind began to pay off. I landed an internship at a small but ambitious tech company in Minneapolis. I threw myself into the work, writing code, staying late, solving problems no one asked me to solve. When graduation came, I walked across the stage in a borrowed suit, clutching my degree like proof that I was no longer theirs. In the crowd, no parents waved, no family cheered. But I didn't care. My life was mine now. I stayed in Minneapolis after graduation, working at that same company. Within 5 years, I'd risen through the ranks, earned stock options, and eventually launched my own startup. The long nights, the cheap takeout dinners, the failed prototypes, all of it slowly built into something real. By 30, I was running a successful firm with 20 employees and an office overlooking the river. I bought a modest but beautiful condo downtown, with tall windows just like the ones I dreamed of as a boy. I had done it. I had escaped. Or so I thought. The first call came on a Sunday afternoon, years after I'd last spoken to them. I almost didn't pick up when I saw the old home number on my phone, but some reflex made me swipe. Daniel, my father's voice thundered, so loud it made me flinch though I was 30 years old and sitting in my own living room. We need to talk about what you owe. At first, I thought I'd misheard. Excuse me. You think you got where you are on your own? You think scholarships pay for diapers? For food? For the roof over your head? His words spilled out fast, rehearsed. You're making good money now. It's time you pay us back. I sat in stunned silence, the phone pressed cold against my ear. Then I heard my mother's softer voice join in. We did everything for you, Daniel. We sacrificed so much. It's only fair you help us now. 10% of your salary, just until we're comfortable. I laughed, sharp and bitter, before I could stop myself. Are you serious? This isn't a joke, my father snapped. Other families get support from their kids. We're not asking for charity. We're asking for what's owed. You've been in our debt since the day you were born. The old dread tightened in my stomach, the same dread I thought I'd buried years ago. But mixed with it was something new. Anger. Real, burning anger. I hung up without another word. For a few weeks, the calls stopped. I thought maybe they'd gotten the message. But then the letters started arriving. First one, then three, then a steady stream, typed documents listing expenses for my childhood. Clothes, food, electricity, school supplies. Each line item neatly totaled at the bottom, the final figure bolded as if it were an invoice. Total due, $247,630. 00. The audacity was staggering. I shredded the letters, blocked their number, and tried to push it out of my mind. I told myself it was just noise, the desperate clamor of people who had lost their grip on me. But then, one evening, they showed up. I was leaving the office late, the Minneapolis streets nearly empty, when I saw them waiting by my car. My father's frame looked smaller than I remembered, his hair thinner, but his eyes burned with the same cruel fire. My mother stood beside him, wringing her hands, her face pale. Daniel, my father barked, as if no time had passed, as if I were still a boy caught sneaking in past curfew. We need to settle this. I froze. My employees could have walked out at any moment, and the last thing I wanted was them seeing this scene. You can't be here, I said, my voice low but firm. You think you're too good for your family now. His words echoed off the brick buildings. All that money, all that success, you wouldn't have any of it if it weren't for us. You owe us. My mother's voice cracked as she added, Please, Daniel. We just want what's fair. Fair. That word tasted like poison. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply got in my car, locked the doors, and drove away, their figures shrinking in my rearview mirror. But inside, something was shifting. This wasn't just harassment. This was escalation. And for the first time, I realized something with chilling clarity. My parents weren't going to stop. The debt they claimed I owed was a chain they would rattle until I either surrendered or broke it once and for all. That night, lying awake in my condo with the city lights flickering outside my window, I whispered the same vow I'd made as a teenager in that cramped Cedar Falls bedroom. I don't owe them anything. But this time, the words weren't just defiance. They were a promise. A promise that soon, I would prove it. The days after my parents confronted me outside the office were a blur of unease. I went about my routines, meetings with investors, product launches, late-night debugging sessions. But under the surface, something kept gnawing. I'd broken free of their house, their town, their grip, yet somehow their shadow had found me here, in the life I had built from nothing. And the shadow was growing darker. The next week, my office manager forwarded me an envelope that had been delivered by hand. Inside was a neatly typed contract, bearing my parents' names as creditors and mine as debtor. It demanded a payment plan of $5,000 per month, adjustable according to inflation. At the bottom was my father's scrawled signature, underlined twice in ink so hard it tore the paper. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity, but instead I felt my jaw clench. My team had seen this envelope pass across the reception desk. My professional life, the empire I had built brick by brick, was being tainted by their delusions. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, contracts spread before me, and realized I had three choices. Cave in and pay them off, keep ignoring them and hope they'd tire out, or fight back. Paying them was unthinkable. Ignoring them had already failed, which left one option. It was time to fight. I started small. I bought a burner phone and recorded every voicemail they left, cataloging their demands. My father's voice, once booming and intimidating, now sounded desperate, gravelly, insistent, repeating the same refrains. You're in debt. You'll pay, one way or another. The letters I had shredded, I regretted, but new ones arrived almost weekly, and this time I saved them in a locked drawer, neatly ordered, each envelope postmarked with their small Iowa town. They read like invoices from hell, back rent, parental labor, moral debt, their tone shifting between cold calculation and emotional blackmail. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Melissa Grant, listened with a furrowed brow as I laid out the evidence. She tapped the stack of letters with her manicured nails. "This is harassment," she said flatly. "Classic. And if they're showing up at your office, that's trespassing. We can file for a restraining order." I exhaled, a mix of relief and dread. "Do it. I'm done playing games." Melissa nodded. "But Daniel, you should also know, if they're desperate enough, they may escalate. People like this don't like losing control." I knew she was right. My entire childhood had been a masterclass in control, and now that control was slipping through their fingers. Weeks turned into months. The restraining order was filed, served, and for a brief time, silence returned. I poured myself into work, trying to forget the sting of old wounds reopening. My startup secured a major round of funding, and Forbes ran a profile calling me a self-made innovator. But peace never lasts when you're dealing with people who thrive on conflict. The silence broke when I opened my email one Monday morning to find a message from an investor, subject line: "Urgent. Concern about your background." My stomach dropped as I clicked. Attached was a PDF, clearly compiled by my father, detailing every supposed expense from my upbringing. It framed me as an ungrateful son refusing to pay debts, painting my success as built on stolen sacrifices. The email had been sent anonymously to half a dozen professional contacts, board members, investors, even journalists. For a moment, panic surged. This was exactly what I had feared, their poison spilling into the life I had built. But then the panic hardened into resolve. They had crossed a line. Melissa helped me craft a response, clean and surgical. The documents were fraudulent, part of ongoing harassment, with legal action already underway. Investors, to their credit, stood by me. But inside, I felt the old rage simmer. It wasn't enough to defend myself. I wanted to end this. And then fate handed me a weapon. While combing through old files for anything that might help my case, I stumbled across a piece of mail I'd nearly forgotten, an IRS notice from years earlier, addressed to me but sent to my parents' house. It had mentioned discrepancies in tax filings tied to my Social Security number during the years I was still in high school. At the time, I assumed it was some clerical error. But now, with fresh eyes, the truth clicked into place. They had used my name, my identity, my future. Digging deeper with Melissa's help, we confirmed it. My parents had filed for government assistance in my name, falsifying income records to boost their benefits. For years, while lecturing me about debt, they had been stealing from the system under the guise of my identity. The hypocrisy was staggering. The irony, perfect. I sat in my office late one night, city lights glittering outside the window, holding the documents in trembling hands. For years, they had tried to convince me I was in their debt. But here it was, in black and white. They were the ones who owed. Not just morally, legally. I closed the folder, a slow smile forming on my face. For the first time in my life, I held the power, and I intended to use it. The plan wasn't to destroy them outright, not yet. No, revenge, like justice, required patience. I needed to let them believe they still had the upper hand. So I kept answering their occasional calls, letting my father rant about repayment schedules, while I quietly recorded every word. I replied to my mother's guilt-ridden emails with short, polite responses, never letting them see the trap forming around them. At the same time, Melissa and I compiled everything: letters, emails, voicemails, the fraudulent filings. Piece by piece, we were building a case that would not just protect me, but expose them. Still, there were moments when the weight threatened to crush me. Nights when I'd lie awake, hearing echoes of my father's bark, my mother's sigh, the endless refrain, "You owe us everything." But now, when those echoes came, I answered them in silence. "No, you owe me." The storm broke on a Tuesday morning. I was in the middle of a strategy session with my executive team when my assistant slipped into the room and whispered that someone was waiting for me downstairs. Her face carried that strained politeness people wear when they don't want to be the bearer of bad news. I knew before she even spoke the names: Robert and Elaine Whitaker. I found them in the lobby, standing by the glass doors like ghosts from a past I had tried to bury. My father's shoulders were hunched now, his frame no longer carrying the bulk of the mill worker he once was, but his eyes still burned with that familiar fire. My mother's face was pale, her lips thin and pressed together, her hands clutched around a manila envelope. "We need to talk," my father said, his voice loud enough that two receptionists looked up, startled. I felt the old heat rise in my chest, the instinct to shrink, to obey. But I had prepared for this moment. Slowly, deliberately, I walked over, hands in my pockets, calm as stone. No, I said evenly. You need to listen. His jaw worked as if he might spit venom, but I didn't give him the chance. I motioned to building security, who stepped closer, ready to escort them out. But before that happened, I pulled a sealed envelope from my briefcase, the one Melissa had helped me prepare weeks ago. This, I said, pressing it into my father's chest, is from my attorney. It outlines every piece of evidence we've collected. The harassment, the trespassing, the slander you sent to my investors. And, I paused, locking eyes with him, the fraud. Every dollar you stole in my name. Every form you falsified. For the first time in my life, I saw my father's face go slack with fear. His bravado cracked like thin glass. My mother's lips trembled as she clutched her envelope tighter, as if her papers could shield her from the words I was speaking. If you contact me again, I continued, my voice steady but rising just enough for the lobby to hear, we will press charges. Not civil. Criminal. You will face the consequences of your actions, not me. I don't owe you anything. You owe me. And soon, you'll owe the state. The silence that followed was deafening. My father's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. His voice, once the booming thunder of my childhood, came out as a stammer. Why you wouldn't, you can't. I already have, I cut in. The report is filed. The investigation has started. This is the last warning you'll get. His face twisted between fury and panic, but he had nothing left to throw at me. No command, no insult, no control. Only silence. Security moved in then, firm but polite, escorting them out through the glass doors. My father tried to bark something as they were led away, but the words died in his throat. My mother glanced back once, her eyes wide and wet, but she said nothing, and then they were gone. That night, I sat alone in my condo, city lights spilling across the floor, replaying the scene in my mind. For years, I had feared that voice, that look, that iron grip of guilt. But now, they were just people, weak, flawed, caught in their own lies. For decades, they had hammered the phrase into me like scripture, you owe us everything. But now, the truth stood like a monument in my chest. They owed me. Owed me the childhood they stole. Owed me the peace they shattered. Owed me the years I spent clawing my way out of the pit they dug. And soon, they'd owe the justice system too. The following weeks moved quickly. Melissa kept me updated. Investigators had begun pulling old tax records, cross-checking the benefits filed under my social security number. It was airtight. Fraud. Paper trails don't lie. And as the investigation gained traction, the calls stopped. The letters ceased. My parents, once so loud, had gone silent. The hunter had become the hunted. But the climax came not in silence, but in one final confrontation. It was a Friday evening when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was Elaine. Her voice was soft, trembling, almost unrecognizable. Daniel, please, don't do this. We were just trying to survive. We didn't mean to hurt you. For a moment, I closed my eyes, memories flooding back. Her gentle hand pressing down on my shoulder as my father shouted, her quiet nods of approval every time he reminded me I was in their debt. You had a choice, I said quietly. You both did. You chose control. You chose lies. And now you're facing the bill. Daniel, we're your parents, she whispered. No, I said, my voice flat as stone. You're my creditors, and the debt is yours. I hung up. The news came 2 months later. Charges filed. A case number. A date set for court. My parents' names inked in black and white. No longer myths looming over me, but defendants answering for their own sins. When Melissa told me, I didn't cheer. I didn't smile. I just sat back in my chair, staring out at the river winding past the city, and let out a long breath I felt I'd been holding since I was a boy in that cramped bedroom in Cedar Falls. For the first time in my life, the debt was settled. The day I stopped being afraid of my parents wasn't quiet or subtle. It wasn't some gentle realization that crept in over time. It was sharp, decisive, and public. It began with another stunt. My father had never learned the art of patience, and once the restraining order was served, he seemed to take it as a challenge. If he couldn't control me through calls or letters, he'd try intimidation. That was always his weapon of choice. So he showed up again. This time it was at a conference where I was speaking, an innovation summit in downtown Minneapolis. I was set to present on stage to a packed audience, rows of investors and journalists waiting for me to explain the next phase of my company's growth. It should have been the proudest moment of my professional life. Instead, as I stepped up to the podium, I saw him, Robert Whitaker, my father, sitting 3 rows back, arms crossed, a smirk tugging at his mouth. My mother, Elaine, sat beside him, clutching a folder in her lap. Even from the stage lights, I could see the envelopes sticking out, those same fake invoices he had been peddling for months. For a second, the old panic rose in my chest. My breath caught, my throat tightened. I was 18 again, standing in that cramped kitchen, hearing him tell me I owed him for existing. But then something inside me snapped into place. Not fear, not anger, clarity. I looked out at the crowd, then back at my father. And instead of shrinking, I began. "Good morning," I said into the microphone, my voice steady. I was going to start today by talking about technology and innovation. But before I do, I want to tell you a personal story. The room shifted, curious. My father leaned back, smug, certain he had me cornered. My mother's hands trembled against the envelope. "I grew up in a small town in Iowa," I continued. "In a house where the words 'you owe us' were said more often than 'we love you.' For years, I was told that my life was a debt, that every breath I took was borrowed, that success would never belong to me. It would always be a payment to someone else." The crowd went silent. My father's smirk faltered. "But here's what I've learned. Nobody owes their abusers a cent. Nobody owes the people who broke them the credit for the life they built despite it all. Debt belongs to the guilty, not the innocent." I saw Elaine's lips part in horror. My father's jaw twitched. "And when those people cross a line, when they use your name, your identity, your future to commit fraud, and then have the audacity to demand repayment, you don't bow. You don't pay. You fight back. You prove that the only debt left is the one they'll have to answer for." Gasps rippled through the room. I didn't name names, but I didn't have to. My father's face was turning redder by the second. My mother clutched the envelope tighter, as though it were a shield. "And that," I said, letting my voice ring, "is why everything we build here, every product, every company, every innovation, will be rooted in freedom. Not in debt, not in control, in freedom." The applause rose like a wave, drowning out everything else. My father's smirk was gone. My mother's eyes glistened. And for the first time, I wasn't their son standing under judgment. I was a man standing on his own stage, with my own voice, and a crowd who believed me. Afterward, security escorted them out before they could make a scene. I saw them in the lobby as I was leaving, my father hissing something under his breath I couldn't hear. My mother tried to meet my eyes, but I kept walking. That night, I got the call from Melissa. "The fraud report's moving fast," she said. "IRS has confirmed discrepancies in their filings. It's serious, Daniel. They're going to have to answer for this." I sat on my balcony, phone warm in my hand, watching the Mississippi River snake through the city lights. For years, I'd been waiting for this moment, the turning point where fear became power. And now here it was. But the final strike came a week later. Elaine called. Her voice was weak, cracked like porcelain. "Daniel, please, don't do this. We didn't mean to hurt you." "You didn't mean to hurt me?" I said, my voice low, shaking with fury I had carried since childhood. "You spent my entire life convincing me I was a debtor to my own parents. You stole my name to scam the government. And now you want me to show mercy?" Tears choked her words. "We're your family." "No," I said. "You're defendants. And the court will see it that way too." And I hung up. The charges were filed 2 weeks later. Tax fraud. Identity misuse. A case number inked against their names. For the first time in my life, the scales had tipped. The people who claimed I owed them everything were about to pay the price for everything they'd taken. And standing there, holding the official paperwork in my hands, I realized the truth that had been waiting all along. The only debt left to settle was theirs. The trial didn't come quickly. The wheels of justice rarely do. But when it finally arrived, it rolled over my parents with the weight of inevitability. The courthouse in Des Moines was a far cry from the fields of Cedar Falls. Marble floors, fluorescent lights, the hum of conversation bouncing off walls. I walked through the double doors wearing a tailored navy suit, Melissa at my side. carrying her folders with the calm precision of someone who already knew the outcome. Robert and Elaine were already seated at the defense table. My father looked smaller than I remembered, hunched and gaunt, his once thick hair patchy and gray. My mother wore a faded blue dress that hung loose on her frame, her eyes darting nervously between the judge and me. They looked like strangers, but the echo of their voices still lingered in my chest. When the charges were read aloud, fraud, misuse of identity, falsifying federal forms, I didn't look away. I wanted them to feel the weight of each syllable, the way I had felt the weight of their words my entire life. The prosecutor presented the case with surgical precision. Copies of the falsified forms, proof of the benefits collected under my Social Security number, even handwriting samples that tied the filings back to my father. Piece by piece, the story unfolded. Years of deceit, greed, and the same entitlement they had weaponized against me since childhood. Melissa leaned close, whispering, "It's airtight." I nodded, but my throat was dry. Watching them squirm wasn't satisfying, not yet. I needed to see them held accountable, not just accused. The defense tried to spin it, of course. Their lawyer painted them as desperate parents, struggling to make ends meet, doing what they had to do to provide. It was never meant to harm their son, he pleaded. It was a misunderstanding, a paperwork error at worst. But the evidence was too strong. Their fraud wasn't a single slip of the pen. It was years of repeated lies, calculated and deliberate. The moment that sealed it came when the prosecutor played one of my recordings for the court. My father's voice, gravelly and furious, filled the room. "You're in our debt, Daniel. You'll pay us back one way or another. We raised you. We fed you. We own you." The words hung in the air, poisonous and undeniable. The jury shifted uncomfortably. The judge's face tightened, and my parents' lawyer looked down at his notes, defeated. The verdict came after only 3 hours of deliberation. Guilty, on all counts. I didn't cheer. I didn't even smile. I just sat there, breathing, as though my lungs had only now remembered how. My parents were let out in handcuffs, their faces pale and drawn, their eyes refusing to meet mine. For decades they had demanded repayment, demanded submission, demanded everything. Now, at last, they were paying their own debt. In the weeks that followed, the story spread. Local papers ran headlines about Iowa couple convicted of long-term fraud. Reporters dug into their past, neighbors shook their heads, and the name Whitaker became synonymous not with family, but with scandal. Back in Minneapolis, I tried to return to normal life. Board meetings, product launches, late nights coding, but something had shifted inside me. For the first time, the weight was gone. The constant echo of "you owe us everything" had been silenced, replaced by the quiet hum of freedom. One evening, after a long day at the office, I walked along the river, the city lights reflecting on the dark water. The crisp autumn air stung my cheeks, but it felt clean. I thought about the boy I used to be, the one who hid report cards in his backpack, who lay awake at night promising himself he'd escape. He had. I had. And in that moment, I realized the real victory wasn't the guilty verdict or the headlines. It wasn't even the sight of my father's smirk finally wiped away. The real victory was the silence in my head, the absence of their voices, the space it left behind for my own. Still, freedom came with its own strange hollowness. I didn't celebrate. I didn't toast with champagne or throw a party. I simply went home to my condo, sat by the window, and watched the city pulse with life. I thought about calling someone, an old college friend, maybe even Mrs. Jameson, the teacher who first believed in me. But instead, I sat alone. Not lonely, just alone. And for the first time, that was enough. Because this time, the silence belonged to me. In the months that followed, I received one final letter from my mother. It wasn't like the others. No invoices, no demands, no guilt. Just a single page, handwritten, shaky. "Daniel, we never thought it would end like this. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know we were wrong. About everything." I read it once, then folded it neatly and placed it in the same drawer where the old threats still sat. Not to keep it as a treasure, to keep it as a reminder. A marker of the line I had crossed and would never go back behind. For the rest of the world, the case was just another headline that would fade in a week. But for me, it was the conclusion of a lifetime's war. The debt had been canceled, the account closed, and for the first time in 30 years, I didn't owe anyone a damn thing. The years after the trial felt almost unreal. For so long, my life had been defined by resistance. Resisting their control, resisting their demands, resisting the idea that I was nothing more than a debtor in my own home. When that resistance finally ended, I had to learn how to live without it. At first, I didn't know what to do with the quiet. No late-night voicemails laced with threats. No envelopes filled with bogus invoices. No unexpected appearances in my office lobby. Just silence. And silence, I discovered, can feel heavier than noise. I tried filling it with work. My company grew rapidly after the trial, not because of the publicity, but because I finally had the mental space to dream again. Without the constant drain of their harassment, my focus sharpened. We launched new products, expanded our offices, and hired brilliant young engineers. For the first time, I felt like a leader rather than a survivor. But success wasn't the only thing I craved. There was something deeper I needed, something I hadn't realized until the dust settled. Connection. For years, I kept people at arm's length. Relationships fizzled. Friendships withered. I never admitted it, but the voice of my father always whispered, "Don't trust. Don't lean. Don't love. You'll owe them too." It wasn't until I started volunteering at a local mentorship program that things began to change. I met kids who reminded me of myself, quiet, withdrawn, carrying invisible weights from homes that didn't love them right. One boy, Marcus, sat across from me in a cafeteria one evening, arms crossed tight, eyes down. "My mom says I'm useless," he muttered, "that I'll never be anything." Something cracked open in me then. I leaned forward and said the words I wished someone had told me when I was his age. "She's wrong. You don't owe her anything. You get to decide who you are, not her." His eyes lifted slowly, searching my face for a lie. When he found none, he gave the faintest nod. It was a small moment, but it shifted something in me. For the first time, I realized my story wasn't just about survival. It could be a weapon for someone else's freedom too. Meanwhile, news of my parents drifted back to me in fragments. Robert was serving time. Prison had broken his posture, aged him past recognition. The man who once filled rooms with his rage now shuffled through hallways under the watch of guards who didn't care who he had once been. Elaine, convicted but given a lighter sentence, was released earlier. She moved into a small apartment outside Cedar Falls, living quietly, her name whispered with pity in town. I never visited. I never called. I didn't need to. The past belonged to them now, not me. But sometimes, late at night, I thought about the letter she had written, the only one without demands. We were wrong. About everything. I didn't forgive her, but I also didn't hate her anymore. Hate takes energy, and I wasn't willing to give them any more of mine. Years later, I stood at a charity gala, tuxedo pressed, glass of champagne in hand, looking out over the crowd. A journalist approached me, notebook in hand, and asked if I ever thought about writing a memoir. "What would you call it?" she asked. I smiled faintly. "The debt that was never mine." Her pen froze mid-scribble. "That's powerful," she said softly. I nodded, but I didn't elaborate. Because the truth was simple. My life wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. About the boy who once hid his report cards under his mattress, the man who built an empire from nothing, and the mentor who told a lost kid that he didn't owe anyone his soul. One crisp fall morning, I drove back through Cedar Falls for the first time in years. Not to visit them. Never that. But to see the place where it all began. The house was smaller than I remembered, sagging under chipped paint and overgrown weeds. It looked abandoned, though I knew someone else lived there now. I parked across the street, rolled down the window, and just stared. Memories flickered like ghosts. My father slamming his boots on the carpet, my mother shaking her head at my dreams, the endless chant of "You owe us everything." I let the silence stretch, then whispered out loud, "I don't owe you anything." And with that, I started the car and drove away. Life didn't become perfect after that. It never does. But it became mine. And that was enough. The final truth I carried with me was simple. Family is not who raises you. It's not blood, not obligation, not debt. Family is who frees you, who lets you be yourself without demanding a receipt. I had lost one family, but I had built another, in my company, in my friends, in the kids who sat across cafeteria tables waiting for someone to tell them they mattered. And in every story I told, in every life I touched, I left behind the same message. You don't owe anyone your soul, not even your parents, especially not them.